Well, welcome back. Welcome back to me. Thanks. So I do want to thank Jim St. John for 2 weeks ago doing the actual Exodus water crossing, the Red Sea stories, chapters 14 and 15. So for today, we're going to try to do the end of chapter 15. The stories start again. And I just want to start right there for us to, I want you to see how these stories kind of hang together, 15, 16, and 17. So we'll begin right there. We're going to begin at where the song ends. If your Bible has poetry in it, where the poetry ends in chapter 15 for this morning. Let's open with prayer. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this gathering of folks, and especially gathered around your word. As Moses did go up the mountain, so we are thrilled to be here and to gather around this holy mountain of the scriptures that you've given to us. Be with us and bless us and help us to draw, however we come and whatever state we are, Lord, help us to draw food and drink for our souls from this your mighty word. Be with us and bless our time together, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So now Exodus chapter 15, and I'm going to start, see there at verse 19. And you notice that that's right after the song. I don't know how much y'all talked about this before. The Song of Miriam is a kind of a little summary of the Exodus Red Sea crossing. And many people think that this song, that first 18 verses of Miriam's song, as it's called, is among the oldest pieces of poetry in the Bible, if not the oldest piece of substantial, or another way to say it is the oldest song in the Bible. This is a very characteristic thing. We see this in other parts of Israel's history, that is, the men going off to war and the women then gathering in celebration and often marking the occasion with a song. Of course, the most famous of those would be in the story of David. When David is rising in the estimation of the people, David goes off and battles the Philistines, and when he comes home, part of how Saul, who's the actual king over him at this time, has to suffer the humiliation of hearing the women sing as they come home. Saul has slain or killed his thousands in this battle, but David his 10,000s. So about the worst thing that the captain of the team could hear. We have a great captain, but this guy scores way more points than him every game. And so anyway, but a song to celebrate. And notice this one is Miriam. Miriam, the sister of Aaron and Moses. Now remember, Miriam has lived with Aaron all these years, and so they are the ones who are really close. And Moses, of course, is the brother who's been away at school all this time, or after school. So anyway, but we have verse 19. When the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and his chariot drivers went into the sea, Yahweh brought back the waters of the sea upon them. But the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. So here's a little summation of that whole 14 and 15. Then the prophet Miriam, but notice how she's referred to, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. Miriam sang to them, "Sing to Yahweh, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." And many people think this would be kind of an antiphonal sort of thing. In other words, a call and response thing. She would sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, horse and rider. The crowd then, the congregation, would answer back, horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. What I want you to see for this morning, we're going to try to rush through. Now, we're not really going to go back to the Exodus at all. That's been accomplished. And now Israel enters into the life in the wilderness. But I want you to see how everything that is in this next little section as they come up to the brink of Mount Sinai is proleptic. A fancy scholarly word just meaning it looks forward. It shines a light forward, not only on things that are coming in Israel's near future, but then things that kind of set the frame or set the form of how Israel will experience many of her, almost all of her years to come after this. So I want you to see that. So I just set them out in broad form here. If we have the Red Sea story, and you might think of this as, of course, this is a battle story. God has triumphed over the army of the Pharaoh. So it's a war story. And then coming up from this is going to be a story of them heading off into the desert, and they're going to be worried after a few days. Uh-oh, where are we going to get water? This is the desert. And so out in the desert they have to find water. They find some water, but then it's bitter. God has to deal with that problem and make it drinkable. After that is the manna and the quail story. They've dealt with the water story. Well, what are we going to eat out here? Basically, their unleavened bread has now run out. So what are they going to use for their provisions? How are they going to be provided for? And the manna and the quail story, in a way, is the key example story for the rest of the Scriptures about the providence, the providence, the providence of God, this providing God that is the God of the Scriptures. But interestingly, then immediately after that we have another water story, and this is the famous water from the rock story where Moses strikes the rock and the water pours forth. Again, a story miraculous, God providing from the water. But then just after this, at the close of chapter 17, is the very first and really the only one in or the second one, if you count the Pharaoh, the only war story in the book of the Exodus. We kind of think of that as, well, isn't that everything after the Exodus? They have to start fighting with all these people. Well, that doesn't start for a while. And in fact, it doesn't start until beyond the whole realm of the Pentateuch. Israel's, what they call the Torah, these first 5 books. The war part starts, of course, with Joshua, with them entering the Promised Land. So here it is a proleptic, a forward-viewing story of really what's going to characterize them more and more as they go up toward the Promised Land. And, of course, there are going to be more and more crossing or entering into lands that are occupied by others. And so the stories will move from the Red Sea, where Israel just stood back and watched Yahweh fight for her, to the battle with Amalek, where now Israel, it's a God victory story to be sure, but now the Israelites will actually go into action themselves and will go fighting for God. So, but what I want you to see is that this is a very characteristic way of telling a story. And when we talk about these stories having a long oral history, one of the characteristic ways to remember a story is to set it out in a frame that's memorable. Notice that this one, and this is a very characteristic, this is known as a chiasmus, a chiasm. Chiasm, chi, is the Greek letter for X. And this is an X way of telling a story. Notice that it kind of shapes like this according to themes. So you can think of the story as 2 parts running to the middle and then running back again. Another way, so how does the X work? The outer parts of the X, notice, are together. These are both battle stories. The next 2 things in the story, as you work toward the middle, one as you go in and one as you come out of the middle, if you were progressing through the stories, are both water stories, finding water stories. In the middle, and whenever you tell a story like this, many of the Psalms are set out like this. Many of the parables of Jesus are set out this way. Ken Bailey loves to show this form. If you've ever read any of Ken Bailey's New Testament studies in the parables of Jesus, this form is all through the Bible, and it's just characteristic of trying to tell stories in a way that makes them easily memorizable, to collect them in this way. Whenever you have a set of stories like this, usually the middle story is the key story. So notice you have 2 here and 2 here. The middle one is story 3, the manna and the quail story. And as I said, the manna and the quail story in Israel's history is the one that gets held up, that Israel will hold out forever after, including, we'll come back to this, but think about in the career of Jesus. We studied this out of place. Backwards, we studied the Gospel of John last spring, but now is the time to recognize when Jesus feeds the 5,000, he gets in the boat and calms the water, saying, I am, to calm the waters and calm the fears of his disciples. Gets to the other side, they come and talk to him about what? The bread that he has just fed them. Chapter 6 of John's Gospel, he has a long and fairly contentious conversation with the people in which they're described as murmuring against him, in which they ask him, Moses gave us the bread from heaven. What's your sign? What sign do you do to give us the bread from heaven? Of course, Jesus' words in that gospel is, I am the bread of heaven. I'm the sign of God. It wasn't Moses who gave you the bread. He says, it was my Father in heaven, and the Father sent me. I am the bread from heaven. So anyway, I just want you to see, these are the stories we're going to cover this morning. We just barely tipped on this one. This is where we're kicking it off. But I wanted you to see that this one pairs up as a battle story. God defeats Pharaoh, and God's people defeat Amalek. The three main stories we're going to focus on this morning are these stories of feeding, and especially stories of providence, of providing, of God's providing. And as we talk about these as becoming kind of pattern stories, stories that Christians ever afterwards, when they hold on to the Old Testament and say, this is what gives us the foundation of our faith, these stories in particular become the ones that set the foundation for what we're talking about. And even the pattern, we say, Israel now has become a people. God saved her through the Exodus. So there's like a salvation event. There is the foundational salvation event. But what comes after salvation? Well, then you have to learn to be a disciple. And so these stories for the Christian church as well as for the Jewish synagogue, these stories become primary stories for saying, now God gets to work teaching His people what it means to live for Him, to live as His people. And remember, God had said that when He said to Pharaoh, I want them to come out from you. They're going to leave behind their bondage so they can go and be free to do everything? No, so that they can enter into my service. They're leaving your service, Pharaoh, so they can be my servants. I remember Brad read that little thing in worship last week. God saying to them, I've chosen you for you to be a holy nation, a nation of priests. That is, people dedicated to my service in the world. So we'll see all of that. That begins this morning. So this is the beginning, really, of Israel's school life. As a nation, she's now been formed. Everybody has this salvation experience in their immediate past. Wow, how God has done incredible things for us. And now, just like any person who, goes to a Billy Graham gathering or, is sitting in church and thinks, oh, he's talking to me. Well, then the next question is, okay, what's next now? You've realized that the salvation of Christ is yours. What's next? The church has always looked at these stories as, these are the pattern stories to teach us, well, these issues that Israel has to wrestle with are our issues. They're issues of every disciple or every person trying to follow in the life that God's given us. So, all right, now, 15:22. Then Moses ordered Israel to set out, so they're beginning, from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. Shur means a wall, and I'm not sure how that applies here, but anyway, that's what the name means. The wilderness, the desert of Shur. Anytime you see wilderness in the Bible too, you can flip-flop that with desert. Wilderness and desert are the same word, the Negev, wilderness, desert, and also Negev is also just the word for south. So we don't think of the south and the desert going together, but in Israel you do, because when you go south you head to desert land. So they went into the wilderness, or you see, if you say it, they went into the desert of Shur. Wilderness, you think of, ooh, who knows what's out there. Desert, you think, yikes, is there anything to eat or drink out there? And that's what these stories are about. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah. So they found some water there. They couldn't drink it because it was bitter. That's why they called it Marah. And Marah means bitter or bitterness, sourness, meaning it tasted like poison, and that's the point. They called the place bitter, Marah, because the water was bitter. And the people complained against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? He cried out to Yahweh, and Yahweh showed him a piece of wood. literally a tree, a piece of tree, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There Yahweh made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he put them to the test. He said, if you'll listen carefully to the voice of Yahweh your God, if you'll do what's right in His sight and give heed to His commandments and keep all His statutes, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Yahweh who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water. So now this little incident, the incident of Marah, the water at Marah, they couldn't drink the waters. Notice incidentally, why does he say this? I won't bring on you any of the plagues of the diseases of Egypt. What was the first thing that was a plague to Egypt? Remember, the water was turned to blood, and then what happened to all the Egyptians? They couldn't drink the water. Yeah, so here's a kind of a little echo of what's happened, and so easy for the Israelites then to think of themselves, oh, God brought us out here. Is this all God's got in His toolbox? All He knows is how to turn water terrible, to make it yuck. Notice they went out 3 days. Remember, they said to Pharaoh over and over, Moses said, we have to go 3 days' journey into the wilderness. And so anyway, maybe that's being echoed here. But this undrinkable water recalls the first plague. Remember, Moses is a water guy. He was drawn out of the water. He's now brought them through the water. So now what can Moses do with water? He needs to do something big. The main theme that we see here, though, is as they name this place bitterness. We see also the beginning of their characteristic response to everything that happens. Many people have said this is the entering of the adolescent years of Israel. Why? Because they whine all the time, So every commentator who's been a parent, says, oh yeah, I recognize that. We'll call this the adolescence of Israel. Actually, a better commentator, wonderful commentary that I've run into for this study is by a man named Peter Enns, E-N-N-S. He teaches at seminary in Philadelphia. Peter Enns writes, well, now remember, Israel was born as a nation coming through the water. That was her birth, so no, this is her time of crying, yes. But no, this would be more her time of her infancy. This is when she's being an infant. And he says that's better because how do you deal with an adolescent? Well, you have to, they're old enough you can make fun of them. That's the main way I dealt with our boys when they were all whiny. But you have to do something. You have to call them down. You have to bark at them. You have to do something to stop that. And says, no, that's not what God does here, though. In fact, the contrary thing that God does is He's so wonderful to the Israelites. And of course, that's more characteristic of, a baby, an infant, also cries all the time, doesn't it? And what does the parent do? The parent, of course, lavishes the generosity of life, everything good and wonderful on the baby. You do everything to stop that crying, and you don't at all think, you stop crying. Yeah, no, you think, well, okay, you're a baby, you're new in this world, I've got to teach you everything about how you get along here. Well, I like that reading of it, and I think it goes a little better. But this phrase, they complained. Why Yilanu? Why Yonilu? That's it. Why Yonilu? No, I had it right the first time. Why Yilanu? There we go. Why Yilanu? Why is like yes, or and they. Yilanu. Yilanu is they whined or they complained. But it also carries kind of a tone of resentment. Like, it should have been different. Why is it like this? And notice, this isn't the first time the Israelites have done it. They did it, remember, back the very first time Moses went to Pharaoh. Remember, he made them work now without straw, and they complained. They whined to him then. Again, at the Red Sea, when they turned around and saw the army chasing them, they complained again. We're going to get killed now. And so now here at Marah, in the next story, the manna and the quail story, they complain again. So all these stories are stories of complaining. And but notice God is just generous and helpful. God shows to Moses that the wood from that tree over there. Put that tree in the water and it will turn sweet. And so he does. This is a forward-looking story. It looks forward. There's a miracle, remember, like this in the prophet Elisha. Centuries later, we'll look back to this story. But anyway, he throws that in the water. It turns sweet. John Calvin says this is an even bigger miracle. The bigger miracle than the stick is that God doesn't tell him to take the stick and beat all the people with it. That he says, no, this will turn the water sweet. And Calvin says that was a big miracle. Instead of killing them all with it or whooping them all, he just turns around and gives them help. God answers them and saves them. But he does say to them, and how characteristic this is of everything we'll see, this has been a test to you. I'm testing you all right now. And part of this back and forth between God and the people will be sort of the people testing God, in a way almost rebelling against Him, but also God testing them. And God saying, and here's the beginning of how we think about salvation. I'm testing you, he says, not to see if they're going to be his people. No, he's already saved them. They are his people already, but now he tests them after he saved them in order to make them better, in order to shape them up, in order to turn them into the people of his heart. So notice, this is before the Sinai revelation, even before the law. He's testing them and saying, this is how I want you to do it. I want to know if you'll follow me. Just an interesting little thing here. Does anybody here have NIV? Look at verse 27. They came to Elim, where there were 12 what? Springs. Maybe I got the wrong translation. Some of them say 12 palm springs.
It says 12 springs and 70.
Yeah, 70 palms. Yeah, the numbers are one thing to know. So first time I read it, I just thought, or maybe I just read a commentator translating this and saying, the Hebrew says 12 palm springs, 12 and 70 palm springs. I just thought, well, look there, Palm Springs, right in the Bible. I just thought that was cute. So anyway, and I thought, well, I guess that's how they would come up with that name, those people out there. So that just shows they were good Bible reading folks. Notice also the blessing of that place, and probably the names there are symbolic. I mean, the numbers there are symbolic, and we can think of it pretty easily. What's the number 12? There are 12 springs, so see, it's like, and there was a spring for each of the tribes. 70 might be a little harder. What's 70 would be the number of? Well, it is a big number of completion, 70 times 10, but 7 times 10, but...
Jethro tell him to get 70 elders.
That's right. There are 70 elders now, so it comprises kind of the whole company of them. Yeah.
While we're talking,
Yeah.
my Bible says the desert of S-I-N, but do you pronounce
The
it the way...
desert of sin. Yeah, see, and that's just a happy little English coincidence. Yeah, I love that idea. Oh, they went in the wilderness of sin. But it's probably, see, where the word is related to is like, think of this, Sinai. So the wilderness of Sin probably is how we would say it to show the linguistic connection is probably, this is the wilderness near Sinai or in the Sinai region. Yeah, so it's
You know where Sinai really is. Sometimes I read they say they're not sure if it was here.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah, I'm the only person in the world who knows. Yeah. No, I don't know. Nobody knows. Yeah. No, it's all guesses from people. Yeah. Yeah. Nobody knows. It's a guess from everybody. Yeah. And of course, if they did, it wouldn't be a mountain anymore because they probably would have dug it all the way to the ground. You know, they would have just taken off layers. You know, it would be like, you know, see that little rise over there in the sidewalk? That's Mount Sinai probably. So anyway, yeah, they don't know. Nobody knows where that is. Anyway, so yeah, first off, they complain, and amazingly, God responds positively. Now, God can get tired of this. It's interesting, in the book of Exodus, they're in the wilderness, and this is the characteristic thing. Trouble arises, the people complain, and God responds generously. He does come to a point if we go on here, you know, when they get to the Sinai, they're going to basically it's going to be just a couple of years' time. We're going to cover 3 books in the Bible. they will leave Sinai in Numbers chapter 11. So the whole of the rest of Exodus, the whole of the book of Leviticus, the laws, of course, but then the very start of Numbers, they're just going to be right around this same region. But when we get to Numbers, all commentators notice the fact that in Exodus, God was very positive and generous with them and always responding and helping them. And here's why you might think, well, okay, by Numbers, they've become the adolescent Israel. Because in Numbers, then God starts to say, if you're going to treat me like this, there's going to be consequences. There will be consequences. And of course, they come, why don't they enter the promised land 2 years after they leave Egypt? And the answer is that God will eventually say to them, in Numbers, when they send out spies to scout the promised land, they come back and say, oh, we don't think we can fight those guys. They're so big and tough. And we looked like bugs standing next to them, And they thought we were bugs, And God says, that's it. Everybody here who's basically over 20, everybody of a drinking age here, you're dying in the wilderness. That's it. You're going to wander around. So they wander another 38 years in the wilderness. So anyway, God can come to the end of this, but I want you to see that these stories, starting out, God is saying to them, is responding to them, overwhelmingly positive. Okay, chapter 16. The whole congregation of Israelites set out from Elim, and Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. So notice they've just gone 2 months now. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, if only we died by the hand of Yahweh in the land of Egypt. You see, we wish he'd killed us back there. So they're already accusing him. We wish he'd killed us back there. He obviously intends to kill us out here. By the hand of Yahweh in Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread, you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So notice they came to Palm Springs, and it's a resort place, so they spent a couple of months there. So they had a nice vacation. And notice the next step in their growth happens when they leave the vacation place. I think it's so interesting here. We all wish our vacations could be a couple of months long, but however long they are. You all know my friend Bill Holmes. We will have gone for years to a preacher's gathering. It just happened. It's why we missed. While I was gone, I was up at Montreat. Bill and I at Montreat, our preacher's gathering, when we first started meeting, all of us were young preachers, and we said, help, we need to help one another. So we would get together at Montreat and say, how do you do this? What are you preaching on? How do you get from here to there? How do you do these things? How do you do a stewardship campaign? And we would just help each other and say, well, we found this, or this works, or this is what we do in my church. And so anyway, we would gather. We started for 3 days. We'd go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then we started whining so much that we said, we're taking this week off anyway. Why don't we go Monday through Thursday? We could go home on Friday. Lots of us are preaching anyway, even when we're away. So, we still have Friday to get the sermon together, Friday and Saturday, and then, so we stretch it to Thursday. Now it goes Monday to Thursday. It doesn't matter how long you stretch it. It's shortly after the very first night, Bill and I, this is a joke between us now, that at some time in that second day we go, oh my gosh, it's the day after yesterday and we're back home. It's about to end, partner. We're going to be home. Bill has to call me partner, and so but he'll say, partner, the end is almost upon us. And it doesn't matter how long it is, and we've got to go back, but when you go back, of course, that's when you're doing the real work. That's when you're really growing as a person. And so anyway, and it's true for the Israelites. They were in Elim. Notice, none of the story is about that. The story starts really when they leave it. And incidentally, we're kind of at the half. We're half of our hour that we're going to spend together. This would be a good time, if you're watching on the video, for you to stop and just talk about that for a moment, about your vacation time, and to talk particularly about this rhythm of when things get tough, we complain, and the Lord's response, thank the Lord, is to be generous with us, and you can see that in your own life. So that would be something to talk about. So now let's begin again with this story. And notice Israel has to take off again. Already the complaining is not only getting worse. Now it's not just, what are we going to do? But God, you brought us out here to kill us off. And saying to Moses, you're the ones who've been the instruments in all this. Here's one question. Could they really die of hunger out here in the wilderness?
Probably.
Oh, well, maybe. Okay, we could say their bread has run out. What else did they bring with them from Egypt? Remember, the Egyptians gave them lots of stuff. They brought their cattle. Yeah. So if things were worse at worst, yeah, they have cattle. Or even better, they could be drinking, they have milk and cheese every day. Yeah, I mean, so they do. So what I want you to see is that the complaint is really, the strength of the complaint is in the bitterness. The wood took care of the bitterness in the water. One question is, what takes care of the bitterness inside of here? And the answer really is, if you don't start here, nothing else takes care of it. Nothing that God does from you takes care of it. In a way, these stories, just reading them, I've just been thinking, boy, what a consistent part this is. It's true in every church that I've ever known about, that churches can either run on encouragement or they can run on picking at each other, complaining and just biting at each other. And they will run either way. A lot more will run off with the biting kind, But a lot of churches continue in that mode ever and ever. And, this, as I said, really is a pattern. It's just fascinating reading these stories and realizing every one of these is just, complain. And how what God and Moses are trying to do to say to them, we've got to turn it. And just to say to ourselves, if we're not turning it ourselves, it doesn't get turned by the circumstances turning for us. So the whole congregation complained, and I think that's why, Paul says in Revelation, in Philippians at the end there, where he says, rejoice. Again, I'll say rejoice. In a way, he's saying, you got to start there. You can't, like I said, it's not going to happen from, oh, good, finally the world will turn perfect for you. If you start by turning your heart, and then you notice the world is different. And because, notice what they say, their memories are pretty faulty. Look in verse 3. If only we died when we sat by the flesh pots. That's the King James translation. The other translations have just kept it because it's such a great word. They're really talking about a cauldron. But flesh pot, that's the old King James word for meat. The meat pots. And we ate our fill. Notice, what did they eat? Well, they were slaves. Were they eating the best meat in the pot? Notice even what they say. We sat by the meat pots. We stuffed ourselves on bread. Yeah. But so they're remembering that as, wasn't that a great occasion? They're watching other people come up and have the feast, and they're going, wow, sure would like some of that meat, but they're not having it. And yeah. And here's another part. As slaves, of course, they have been used to other people feeding them all the time. Their inward attitude is also completely passive. But they ate the bread. They didn't eat the meat, most likely. Verse 4, then Yahweh said to Moses, now notice the response, I am going to rain bread from out of heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, again that word, whether they'll follow my instruction or not. So here's the education part. This will be a test for all of you. Will you just do what I say? On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it'll be twice as much as they gather on other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you shall know that it was Yahweh who brought you out of the land of Egypt. See, this is how it's supposed to bring that lesson home. Surely you'd think they know that by now. But no, you have to repeat it. And in the morning you shall see the glory of Yahweh, because He's heard your complaining against Yahweh. For what are we that you complain against us? So here's Moses learning a lesson. You see, I don't have to take everything personally. And Moses said, when Yahweh gives you meat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, because Yahweh's heard your complaining you utter against Him, what are we? Your complaining isn't against us, but against Yahweh. I'm going to rain bread from heaven to you. This is a real change here. Every time it's rained, so to speak, in a big way out of heaven before, it's been something awful. Remember, the plagues were filled with, I'm going to rain down terrible things out of heaven with you. But even think before that, how did Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed? The famous fire and brimstone rained down upon them. Or think before that, Noah and the flood. Of course, the rain was the instrument of the destruction of all human life. So here God says, now I'm going to turn this into a positive thing. Rain for you now is going to be a blessing. I'm going to rain down bread from heaven to you. But I will test them. Again, they're already saved. He's not testing them to fail them. He says this over and over, and I think it's important to get our minds around it. This is testing, like saying, why does a football team continue to run the same plays every afternoon? Because, and furthermore, the guys are failing. Why doesn't the coach say to them, let Bobby score a touchdown this time. Don't tackle him this time. We want him to get in the end zone every time he plays. Well, a coach would say, no, that's not what I want him to do. I want him to learn to catch the ball, fight through whoever's trying to tackle him, and get everything he can get out of this play. And if you tackle him every time, you see, there's the failure. That failure is testing him. It's teaching him. Well, do it a little differently. Do it this way now, and you'll do it better. We have such a strong image in our minds of a test is something that, it just shows you your failure. But no, the point of the test is for you to go through it and for it to strengthen you and to give you more. It's interesting, I read two fascinating articles in the last couple of weeks. One of them was from a group of people in New Jersey, and they were holding a big celebration for and what they were celebrating, they were having a reunion of all the people who had gone through this school, and this was the best teacher that all of them said they had ever had and had made all this difference. And they were these leaders in every facet of society. They were all over the world, but they were coming back to celebrate Mr. K. And the whole thing they said about Mr. K, he was the toughest teacher we ever had. And he was a music teacher. And they said he would always point out something you did wrong. He almost never, and high praise from him was to say, that'll do. That's okay. That's okay. That one, you got that worked, And, but, as these people were all coming back in appreciation to say, and then of course the point of the article was, today we lavish, every kid on the team gets the trophy and all, that this is our new, well, we don't want to hurt anybody's self-esteem. And they were just all commenting and say, Mr. K, he didn't care a poot about your self-esteem. He wanted you to do it right. And he held up this standard of make it perfect and beautiful and as good as it's ever been done. And I saw this last weekend, interesting story from, just because I like his cartoon, I don't know if you read Dilbert, Scott Adams. Of course, that story's all about this workplace that's all the time, everybody's messing up all the time and everybody's incompetent and terrible. But this article was about, and he's just written a book called Learn to Fail. And he was saying, probably 95% of the things I've tried, and he just kind of goes through everything he's tried, businesses he started and everything, have failed, he says. But you have to fail enough for the luck of success to come around and catch you. And failure is the way you get up and try it again, and you learn enough that you start over and go in a different way. So, about complaining and about, I will test them. One of the things that Yahweh from His side is doing over and over is testing the people. And He just wants to know, in a way, the lesson is so simple. Will you listen to me and will you do it? Will you listen, meaning you will trust me enough to say, He might have something we should listen to. And will you trust me enough to obey me, to act? And in a way, that's the gold standard of everything, but it's so hard. Okay, let's go on. Your complaining isn't against us, but against the Lord. Verse 9. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the Israelites. Notice, they are a nation who's a church. Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, draw near to Yahweh, He has heard your complaining. And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation, we haven't seen Aaron much lately, but now he's doing his speak out spokesman rule. As he spoke to the whole congregation, they looked toward the wilderness, the desert, and the glory of Yahweh appeared in the cloud. Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, I have heard their complaining, the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, now we might again expect him to say, I've heard their complaining. Say to them, that's it. I'm done with you, or I'm starting all over, or I told Moses to kill you once, I'm really going to go, or no, he didn't say any of that. I've heard their complaining. Say to them, at twilight you'll eat meat, and in the morning you'll have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am Yahweh your God. So, in the evening, quails came up, verse 13, and they covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. People are fascinated by that description. What was this really? And is it still around? Could we find it? When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, what's that? I love that. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because when they saw it, they said, what's that? And what I love about it is, then that's what they named it. They named it, what's that? Hebrew for what's that is manna. Manna. Well, what is that stuff? It's manna. It's manna. It's what's that? That's what they called it. To me, that I love the self-awareness of that and the kind of self-humor of it. You know, it says, okay, these people have a chance. They might survive through the week if they could think to do that. They called it, what's that? They said, what's that? For they didn't know what it was. Moses said to them, that's the bread that Yahweh's given you to eat. This is what Yahweh's commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer to a person, according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents. The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. Now, this little description, of course, it recurs again in the story of the Acts. The sign that the Holy Spirit is there is that they all began sharing everything. And those who had much had nothing too much because they were sharing everything they had. And those who had too little didn't have any lack because others were sharing with them. And everybody was... but notice in this story, the key thing is the provision. God is giving everyone exactly as much as they need. But along with the provision is also the test. And the test is, will you trust me? Will you take this in faith? And will your faith stay alive? Will it say, in the next moment, and I'll trust you tomorrow morning as well? Or will you take it here and say, that's it, I got my stuff, I got to hoard it, I got to keep it away from everybody else, and I'm going to distrust God by saying, He might not do this tomorrow. So notice what Moses said to them, 19. And here's the test. Let no one leave any of it till the morning. But they didn't listen to Moses. Some left part of it until morning, and it bred worms, and it became foul. And Moses was angry with them. See, you didn't listen. Morning by morning, they gathered it as much as each needed, but when the sun grew hot, it melted. Now notice we began with, you'll eat meat in the evening. The quails came up. Did the quails continue through all the time in the wilderness? What do you think? Did they have quail every night and manna every morning as they went through the wilderness? Most people think the quails were kind of seasonal. They came and went. And most people would say, as a natural phenomenon, the quails do come and go. They migrate up to what we would call Europe in the springtime, and they migrate back in the fall. And they fly low, and when they get pooped, they stay on the ground, and so they can be caught by hand. But see, the whole point, of the miracle is they came at exactly the right time, and enough of them came that they exactly fed everybody. So that's the point of the miracle, even if there's a natural explanation for, well, how could this have happened? The description of the verse 14 of the manna, people love this and want to talk about it. And a lot of people talk about insect excretions and trees that And particularly, there is an insect that apparently feeds or lives on the tamarisk tree, and they say it basically makes this kind of goo that could fill this description and stuff. Again, that doesn't matter. The whole point is that they can bake it, and it can, and the other thing is, it was tasty. It doesn't taste like insect excretion. And again, it doesn't help to try to get the miracle part out of it, and it does a lot of harm. Because Moses says, no, it's the Lord's bread. For me, the key point is, even more, I want you to see how this harkens back to God's name. This shows, this is a revelation of who God is. Remember, God said, well, what will I tell them your name is? And you see, a name is a way of capturing someone. And He said, my name is, I'll be what I will be. You see, I'm the God of freedom. I'm the God who does whatever I want. And your job is to just grab on and hang on. And I'm the God who does what, and well, manna, manna is the perfect expression of that. Because here's the bread that God gives. It only lasts for today. Every day's portion is for today. And when you see it, you go, what's that? And the answer is, that's what God has given us. And, well, it's actually kind of sweet. It tastes wonderful. The whole point is, it's exactly what you want. It's a good given it, but God knew it, and you didn't. And you didn't have to. To me, it's a kind of a picture of Christian discipleship and about stepping into each day. This is the picture of Christian life, to say, God, I know you're laying something out there fine like hoarfrost on the floor of this day. Let me go pick it up and feast on it, and let me not say, what's that? But let me go out and say, whoo, what's that? It's the bread that the Lord has given me. Those who gathered much, as I said, the miracle, it melted with the sun. Again, it's a physical thing, but it points to this spiritual reality. It can't be kept. It has to be put into action or used right now. We're studying the Sermon on the Mount. Dallas Willard, at one point in his book, points out that I think he says about one out of every 7 verses in the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus saying, you heard this, now do it. If you do this when you hear it, do this and hear it if you do this. And of course the whole thing is tied up that way. Everyone who hears what I say and does it will be like the one who built his house on rock. Everyone who hears what I say and doesn't do it. Everything, Jesus returns to this over and over. So, God's test gives them the instructions. Will you just trust me and do it? Verse 22, on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers apiece. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what Yahweh's commanded. Now here's a further miracle. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to Yahweh. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Peter Enns says this ought to be stronger, that what it says is bake what there is to bake. Bake what's bakeable and boil what has to be boiled, what's there to be boiled. And all that's left over, in other words, bake the bread and boil the meat so that it'll keep for a day. And all that's left over, put aside to be kept till morning. So they put it aside till morning as Moses commanded. And now here's another miracle. And it didn't become foul. There were no worms in it. Moses said, eat it today, for today's a Sabbath to Yahweh. Today you won't find it in the field. 6 days you'll gather it, but on the 7th, the Sabbath, there will be none. Notice the Sabbath observance. We think of that as this is one thing God gave in the 10 Commandments. No. Notice the Israelites, and of course we see this in the Bible, no, God gave this in creation. God, so to speak, stitched the Sabbath day into the structure of reality, the whole created world. And how do we know that? Because God takes the Sabbath off. God rested on the Sabbath, on the 7th day, and He rests on the Sabbath. And so the miracle here is on this day, He doesn't give any manna. He gives it 6 faithfully, and it's always perfect and just enough. And on the 6th one, the miracle is He doesn't give it today. He rests when He calls His people to rest. But notice, it comes before the revelation of the law, as if God were saying, well, yeah, this is how things are. This is how I made everything in this world, with the rest foundation to it. On the seventh day, 27, and now this is getting repetitive, some of the people went out together. They found none. So in other words, they didn't do what the Lord said. Yahweh said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions? Well, the answer is, as long as we're here. See, Yahweh has given you the Sabbath. That's why on the sixth day, He gives you food for 2 days. Stay where you are. Don't leave your place on the seventh day. Don't go looking for it. So the people rested on the Sabbath day. The house of Israel called that stuff manna. What's that? It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it like wafers made with honey. Moses said, this is what Yahweh's commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations. So again, we're starting the education of the people. So now you keep this manna so that we can show it to future generations. So they'll know that this is how the Lord did, in order that they, the future generations, may see the food with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put an omer of manna in it, place it in front of Yahweh to be kept throughout your generations. As Yahweh commanded Moses, Aaron placed it before the covenant for safekeeping. The Israelites ate manna 40 years. So this is the place where most people say, well, the quail came. There is another place in Numbers where they complain again, and Yahweh sends them. He says, do you want the quail back? Okay, I'm choking you with quail today. So, again, it's a response to the teenager mode as opposed to the baby mode. But the manna, no, the manna came every day, regularly, all 6 days, every week, for all 40 years. And when they do cross over into the Promised Land in Joshua, that's one of the things it says, and the manna stopped that very day. They ate it until they came to a habitable land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan, and omer is 1/10 of an ephah. Now, notice, it's just interesting. The writer is saying, you probably don't even know what an omer is. I'm writing to people who will be reading this later. So he's talking to us. Okay, Exodus 17. From the wilderness of Sin, or Shine, or Sign, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages, as Yahweh commanded. They camped at Rephidim, for there was no water, but there was no water for the people to drink. So now we're down to here, the fourth story. Moses said to them, the people quarreled with Moses. Now notice they've gone beyond complaining, and this is a different word. Beyond complaining now they've gone, this word is reeve, R-A-B, or R-I, it's pronounced like a V, R-A-V, reeve. And notice they will name this place Meribah. Meribah. Well, the reeve means arguing or contending or disputing. So the place of disputation. They quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses said, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test Yahweh? But the people thirsted there for water, and they complained against Moses and said, why did you bring us out to Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? Okay, they've done that before. So Moses cried out to Yahweh. Notice what they did when the Pharaoh was oppressing them. Now Moses does when they're griping at him. Moses cried out to Yahweh, what do I do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. Now remember, Moses had said, you're not hurting me any, but still, it just kind of shows you, well, still, if they complain to you, you're the one that feels like you're in the spot. And that's how Moses feels. Moses cried out, what will I do? They're ready to stone me. You see, they're mad at you, Yahweh. Yahweh said to Moses, go on ahead of the people. Robert Alter says, on the strength of older translations, he says, go on ahead. No, this should say, pass in front of the people. He says, Yahweh is actually saying to Moses, like, well, no, you're going to run the gauntlet one more time. I know they're about ready to stone you, but now here's your education. You have to trust me enough. You go right back in front of those people. You walk in front of them. Take some of the elders with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I'll be standing there in front of you at the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it so the people may drink. Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah, which means testing, and Meribah, which means quarreling, because the Israelites quarreled and tested Yahweh, saying, is Yahweh among us or not? Moses cried out. The Lord said, go ahead of him. Notice, though, now we both look forward to backward to the plagues. God says, remember that staff that you used held up over the water. I want you to take that again. So it's a reminder to the people. And remember, they were complaining. Is Yahweh among us or not? This staff is a sign. Remember what Yahweh did when I raised this staff before, when I struck the dust, when I struck the river, before. This is the staff. You see that Yahweh's showing, I'm this God, I'm with you. The staff in your hand, it was a symbol, and notice that it's both things. The staff was the instrument of destruction in Egypt with the Pharaoh. Now it's the instrument of blessing. You want water? God will give you His blessing. So again, the response of Yahweh, the unlikely response, responding with all this provision. And when He strikes the rock, as I said, just as He struck the river before, again, another water incident while He's out there. Okay, let's go on. Now the last story, and the story of the battle with Amalek. Then Amalek, 8, came up and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Now, they're passing through territories. They've gone down to the south. Wendell had a good map. Most Bibles have a map like this, or many do, that show them after the Exodus. You know, they could have just gone straight across. That's where we think of the Israel territory, but no, God sends them. The Philistines were in there. Philistine, Palestine, they go together. Philistines were in that area right up on the beach. And so God sent them south, and they went south to go to Sinai. Wherever it is, it's somewhere there in that southern region. But so, who was in the southern region? Well, apparently the Amalekites were. And this becomes a legendary opponent of the people. The first really opponents that they ran into. So they become kind of the sign for generations to come of the enemies of Yahweh and of His people. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Now, does anybody have a translation that says, then the Amalekites came and fought with them? This is one place where the word actually is Amalek, is the name of the man. But in this case, Amalek is notice how the story goes on, it's referring to the people, all the Amalekites. So anyway, the name of the man is being used as the name of the whole nation. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim, but it wasn't just one guy by himself out there going, you kids, get off my lawn. You know, it was a whole country. They're trying to take over our land. They fought with Israel. Moses said to Joshua, now, we haven't seen him at all before, but notice here he is, and he's kind of his first appearance as Moses' assistant. And it's just forward-looking. He's obviously going to take a big part in the story, but not until after Deuteronomy. But still, so we do see him that he's there, but he's obviously well known to the people, and he's already been doing this job. But it's the first time he appears in the story to us. Moses said to Joshua, choose some men for us and go out, fight with Amalek. And as I said, this is new. The people have watched Yahweh fight for them before. Now they enter into the battle. And of course, this is, again, forward-looking. This will be what their coming future will be like. Tomorrow, says Yahweh, I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Moses says, tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Tomorrow, like Annie, sun will come out tomorrow. Tomorrow is it's a great place. And it's just interesting. In lots of stories, tomorrow is the place where God sort of lives. God is going to do great things tomorrow. A better tomorrow is something I love. I don't really love Annie, but I can't get that song out of my head. So, one day more, na 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 na. I remember what am I thinking of? Les Mis, thank you. In Les Mis, the end of the first scene is, the first act is, all of these characters that we've been introduced, they all have their reasons for standing on the brink of this great battle that's coming up, and they're all thinking to themselves, God is going to do something final, judgmental, revelational at this battle tomorrow. The big cop is thinking, I'll catch all these little guys and throw them in jail or even kill them if they're going to keep doing all these criminal activity. Valjean is thinking to himself, I've been running from this great past. Is God going to break all that out into the open? How am I going to deal with that? Am I going to be able to trust Him through all of that? Everybody in the battle is thinking, our big deal is coming tomorrow, one day more. One day, well, here's Moses. And of course, he's been doing this all through the thing. This is reiterating a theme that we've seen all out with the Pharaoh. He said, tomorrow this will happen. Tomorrow this will happen. Tomorrow. So now, again, that was for destruction in Egypt, and now the scene is, yeah, God's still here with us. Yahweh is with us, and so He'll be there tomorrow when I go up the hill. Of course, He's going up this hill for the battle, and that reminds us there's a big hill coming, the hill of Sinai. And again, he had the staff of God before. He's carrying the staff out with him now. So Joshua did, we'll just wrap up this battle, as Moses told him, and he fought with Amalek. So now, this is what distinguishes Joshua from everybody else in the company. Moses told him what God wanted him to do. Joshua went and did it. Wow, it looks so easy when you do it, you know. That's the sign of the great performer, you know. You make that look so easy, you know. I remember seeing Yo-Yo Ma at Converse, you know, and you watch a guy like that, you know, he goes out and he sits down and he takes his instrument out and he puts it in his lap and the instrument starts to sing. And he just looks off into the distance like, you know, well, it's nice to be here tonight. I wonder what this place is really like, you know. And there's this beautiful, the instrument is just doing its work, you know. And when you finish, that's what you think to yourself. You made it look like playing that instrument was the easiest thing in the world. Well, so here's the Joshua. He makes it easy, you know. Okay, oh, you want me to do that? Okay, that's what I should do. He went out, he fought with Amalek while Moses, Aaron, and Hur, we haven't seen that man before, he's the son of Caleb, went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses, in other words, this is great. When Moses went like this, he gained the upper hand. When he lowered his hands, Amalek gained the upper hand. So I just thought that was cute. But notice it's right there in the story. I didn't make it up. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone, they put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the sun set, and Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the sword. So now all of this is just kind of looking forward to stories to come. The Aaron and Hur sides really look forward to the next chapter because there Jethro, his father-in-law, and he and Moses are going to have a reunion, but Jethro's going to say to him, you can't keep doing all this stuff by yourself. You have to recruit other people who are going to help you deal with all the troubles of Israel. So I just think this picture of them holding Moses' hands up, what's he doing? Well, it's a characteristic kind of prayer pose, but I think just to me it makes more sense to say, really the point of the story is he can't do it all by himself. He needs others even when he's doing this important thing to hold him up, and that's what Aaron and Hur are doing. Just to finish this chapter, then Yahweh said to Moses, write this as a reminder in a book and recite it in the hearing of Joshua. I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar like Abraham or Jacob before him and called it, the Lord is my banner, Yahweh Nisi. And he said, a hand upon the banner of Yahweh, Yahweh will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now that sounds, well, it just, as I said before, Amalek becomes kind of the historic word in Israel for the enemies of the people of God. Of course, as they go up into Canaan, they're going to have to deal with many ones. But the Amalekites are the ones that King Saul is supposed to defeat King Agag, and he refuses to dispose of the king. David will finally finish off the Amalekites. The Amalekites, they don't appear in history anywhere else. So in a way, this little prophecy gets fulfilled, although it's interesting, it gets remembered. I said I'd wipe them out, and well, okay, but anyway, just one of those little ironies of the record. But so these stories especially about the provision of God, and especially about the response of the people, and really stories that are meant to say to us, you know, what is and what's not, the ways that are helpful and that move the people of God along. So we'll start right there next time, and we'll be on the brink of Mount Sinai, and we'll come up to the giving of the Ten Commandments. Let's close with prayer. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for these stories. Thank you especially for this reminder from you that life doesn't change, that your people, you provide for us every day and every moment, every morning, every evening. But that most of all, there is a test that you're giving to us to see where we can take what's happening today and grow strong, especially in the places where we're being challenged, where we're being defeated, where we're being turned against. Lord, help us to take each one of those things and trusting that we belong to you, that nothing can take us out of your hand, that this too is a chance for us to walk forward and to gain strength and to grow as your people. Help us to make that happen. Make us a people of encouragement and support and help for one another. Help us to hold each other's arms up as we are praying, that we may journey with you into every great and wonderful thing you have. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.